Hey folks, Al here from Open Walnut, and today we'll be doing Visual, a medium Windows-based machine from Hack the Box. This was an interesting machine with numerous steps to own it. I've learned a few new things about Visual Studio on C#, along with setting up a web server for a local Git repo. This Priv Escalation consisted of 2 different steps, which were actually quite fun. Anyways, let's get it cracking. Let's begin with the port scan as per usual. Do sudo nmap ss p, so that's scan all ports, and we'll do visual HTTP. While that is running, I'm going to split the terminal and do another nmap with just ports 100 visual.htp. And looks like so far we only have port 80 HTTP open. So let's check that out while the full scan is running. And let's head to HTTP visual.htp. And here we have our landing page. Welcome to Visual. Experience a revolutionary approach to Visual Studio project compilation with Visual. Say goodbye to the frustration of build issues on your machine. Simply provide us with your Git Repo link and we'll handle the rest. Our cutting-edge technology compiles your projects and sends back the executable or DLL files you need effortlessly and efficiently. We currently support .NET 6.0 and C# programs, so make sure your Git repo includes an SLN file for successful compilation. Trust Visual to simplify and streamline your project compilation process like never before. So, a few key points we get from this paragraph is that it uses Visual Studio, it compiles your project, you have to provide a Git repo link, and it returns an executable. It supports .NET 6.0 and C# programs. So, what we need in this case is to create a C# program, to upload it using this link, and to make sure that the location that it gets uploaded from is Git repo. And the idea here, I believe, is to achieve code execution through this upload. So let's go ahead and Google how to create a .NET file. By the way, looks like our full port scan is finished and it's just that one port. So let's Google for .NET create SLN program. .NET SLN program provides a convenient way to list and modify project and solution file. That does not look like a how-to me. Show activity in this post. I can't really see what this is about, so I will skip it. How to create a new solution and project using .NET CLI. And this sounds like it will help us to create the program and exactly what we're looking for. When I create a new project, I usually create the remote Git repo first. Once it's created, I clone it locally and open up terminal window in that local folder. Most of my NetStorage repositories have a single solution in them. So here is the steps on how to create the new program. Let's create a new directory called prog. We'll do .NET new SLN. Actually, you know what? Let's move this SLN into our folder prog, and let's move to that folder. Next, we'll create source, And let's just copy the below commands. And looks like our solution has been created. Let's go back here. So we have created our project, and now we need Git Repo link. So the next thing we should Google is how to set up Git Repo over HTTP. I will be using Python HTTP server. So let's Google Git Repo Python HTTP.server. And therefore we get this link, a quick and hacky way to serve a Git Repo over HTTP. The Git daemon is a recommended tool for a more permanent setup, or you can configure a production-ready server like Nginx. So let's click on that. And more development tools are supporting Git repository URLs as a way of pointing to code or data. That's convenient if you're working with mature third-party repository that's already hosted, but it means that sometimes you just need a quick way to serve a repo over a web interface for experimental work, which is exactly what we need. So we have created our own repo, so I don't think we need this step. Let's do git init. This will make this particular folder a Git repository. And if we do ls/laht, we can see that the Git folder has been created right here. So if we cd to the Git folder, we need to do update server info. And then we need to do move hooks post update to hooks post update. Let's see, sorry, hooks post update sample to hooks post update. And lastly, we can run our HTTP server. So let's quickly go over what we just did. So the git bear update server info is typically used in Git repositories that are set up as bear repositories. A bear repository in Git is one that doesn't have a working directory, it only contains the version control information. The update server info command is used to update the auxiliary files required by DOM servers to serve DOM clients, quote unquote. In more detail, when you interact with the remote Git repository over HTTP or the Git protocol, in our case, it's going to be HTTP. Sometimes the server doesn't actively manage the repository like normal Git clients does. In these cases, Git may need additional metadata files to ensure proper functioning, especially for older versions of Git or certain server configurations. The update server info command generates or updates these additional metadata files, allowing clients to access the repositories more efficiently. The move hooks post update sample, hooks post update. This command moves the sample post update hook provided by Git from the hooks directory to a new location. Well, in our case, it actually renames it. In Git, hooks are scripts that run automatically in response to certain events, like commits or merges. The post update script is a template provided by Git that demonstrates how a post update hooks might work. So now that we did all that, let's go back and test out this setup before moving on. We will do Python m. Oh, actually, we gotta do git add, git show, I believe, git status. Yep, so we need to commit all of these files before proceeding. So let's do git commit m init. And now they have been committed. And I believe now that they have been committed, we need to do update server info again. If you will be doing this multiple times, it might be a good idea to just write a bash script in case something goes wrong and you have to repeat these steps all over again. So now that we have server running on port 80, let's head here and put the URL for our Git. So whenever you put the URL, just make sure it is linked to the Git folder. Otherwise, this will fail. And let's monitor this just to ensure everything goes as expected. So it looks like the build is being compiled. And as you can see, it looks like it grabbed the necessary files. And looks like our build has succeeded. And now we can proceed to the next step. I think the next logical step here would be to Google how to execute code before compiling, or maybe during compilation. Without using a pre-build event, not possible using Visual Studio alone. So looks like pre-build events is something that may help us to execute code. Let's click on this since it's official from Microsoft. I did not see any mentions of the build event that we've read the description about here. So let's click on this link and see if we can find some more information there. So here it says, you can use pre-build events if you have some C# code that contains your checks, create a command line application using the code and return an appropriate value, then execute it as a pre-built event. So let's go back and perhaps specify pre-build here. And looks like the first link we get is Microsoft Learn. So let's click on that and check it out. So it looks like you can specify build event through the graphical user interface. However, we don't have access to that. But also, it seems that you can specify that in your project file. When you perform previous steps, modify the project file by adding pre-build or post-build target with necessary MS build code to execute the steps you provided. You can open the project file and see the steps, modifying the steps in the project file. So it looks like it's just a few lines of XML and it looks pretty straightforward. The command gets executed here. And yeah, that's about it. So let's try adding this to our project file. I will split the terminal. And this would be our project file. So let's modify that and paste the XML code. Not sure if indentation matters, but we'll indent just in case. And this would be it for now. However, let's split the terminal in two again. And we need to specify our code execution. And in this case, I will be providing a reverse shell. Now I'm gonna copy my reverse shell into my folder. For this, the reverse shell is invoke PowerShell TCP.ps1 from Nisheng. I will go back here actually and modify my command. And I will specify the port as 8090. So the command I used here is PowerShell execution policy bypass, and then the download string, which will download my PowerShell from port 8090. Now that that is done, I think let's be a bit proactive. And in case that works, let's download the latest WinPeas executable as well. That way we can enumerate the target without needing to go back and forth and downloading files and shutting off the web server and downloading files and shutting off the web server again. From here, I will download WinPeas any.exe. Here, I will set up that port that is mentioned right here, the listening port. Let's exit this web server, and here we will do git add, git status, git commit, so here is the HTTP server set up for the Git repository. Here is the HTTP server set up from where it will grab our reverse shell from. And here in this window, we have the listener set up on port 80, which should in theory catch our reverse shell. So let's give it a go. And hopefully this works. And looks like it compiled our binary, but we did not get a reverse shell. Let's see what happened. I know exactly what happened, and I forgot to do the following part. So since we updated the file, this should have ran to update all the metadata because it's a dump server. However, that I did not do that, and therefore, as a result, we did not get the reverse shell. Okay, nothing to commit, but I was just doing that just in case. Let's try this again. And there we go. It looks like we're in. Let's do who am I? And it looks like we have logged in with a user Enox. Let's do who am I? Priv. Nothing really that stands out. So let's do wget 8090. And looks like it has downloaded. So let's do wp-any.exe. Hold up, let me actually make this more accessible now that we don't need the above. Still going to keep those tabs open just in case we disconnect or we need any of them again. But for now, I'll make this one bigger. So let's do wp-any. Some Windows systems are large, and unfortunately, we do not get live progress like we do with WinPeas in Linux. Therefore, I usually skip out some of the steps when using WinPeas. And in case I don't get the information required, I then run a bigger scan. So I'm just pasting the options. I really wish there would be a command, or an option just to do a fast scan. I believe there used to be, but I'm not sure what happened to it. Maybe it got deprecated. We will skip file analysis as that one takes the longest. I'm not going to explain what each of these options that I pasted does because it's right here. And let's run this. So let's review this. Looks like we have Windows Server 2019. It looks like it's potentially vulnerable to some of the CVEs. However, unless I cannot find any other way in, I'm not going to use those, as most of the time it is not the intended way. Sometimes it is, and sometimes it's a good option when you're completely out of options and you've tried everything else. At least that's how I approach Hack the Box boxes. In real life engagements, I usually try to find as many ways as possible to penetrate the system. So far, nothing interesting, it seems. And for users, looks like we have administrator, default account, which is disabled. Then we have Enox, which is our current user. And no other user seems to be enabled. Looks like we may be able to potentially hijack Apache binary. And looks like everyone can write to that folder. Let's take a note of this just in case. We can check who the Apache server runs under. Sometimes it does run under system in misconfigured systems. Looks like we can start and stop some of the services. Maybe this is something interesting to look into as well. I'm just scrolling through and so far I don't see anything else interesting. Here it looks like we have NTLM v2 hash. However, because we only have access to port 80, I don't think it's really useful to us. We can of course note it down. Perhaps administrator has the exact same password as this hash. And here it points us to XAMPP directory again with a bunch of files that have all access, which is exactly where Apache HTTP server was pointing us. So I think it's when you have this many errors, this many findings, it's worth checking out, even if it's nothing there. We can also we can enumerate Apache HTTP service a bit more as well, just to find out some more details about it. So you can do get service name Apache, pipe it into FL, which I believe stands for format list. And then you can specify property wildcard to get all of the properties. Here, I think the purpose is to find out what user the service runs at. However, it does not seem to give us that information anywhere here. However, there is another commandlet that you can use for this called get CIM instance. And CIM stands for Common Information Model, and it acts kind of like Windows Management Instrumentation service. Pretty much it lets you get information about services. So let's do class win32 underscore service filter name equals Apache HTTP server, and we will do select object all. So looks like we got an error. Let's see. Let's repaste this. Okay, dokie. Looks like that worked. Not sure where the error was here. Let's compare get CIM instance, get CIM instance, class, Win32 service, Win32 service, filter, name equals. Looks the same to me. Get CIM instance is not recognized instance. Oh, I forgot a dash. So, and here we get a bit more information, as you can see, compared to the last output. And it looks like this service runs under NT-Authority local service. Before trying anything else, let's perhaps see if we can perform privilege escalation from that. And looks like we have some results. On Windows 10, a UNPP device host service is configured to execute without impersonation privileges. Let's take a look at this. So here it talks about an article that explained how the authors were able to leverage a COM object exposed by this service to get arbitrary code execution in the context of NT-Authority local service, which is exactly what we have now. Usually in this situation, you could then elevate your privileges to NT-Authority system thanks to impersonation capabilities of this service account. However, in that case, it wasn't that simple as they outlined in their conclusion. So it looks like local service initially has only two privileges, SE change notify privilege and SE global privilege. I'm not going to be reading this whole article. I will, however, as per usual, post this material in the video description, so check it out. However, once you go through this whole exploit, it seems like you may be able to, this whole exploitation process, you may be able to get some more privileges. And looks like by the end, you get a SE impersonate privilege enabled. And with this, I believe, if my memory serves me right, you can use exploit such as Juicy Potato or any other potatoes. However, I don't think you can actually use Juicy Potato in this case. If I remember correctly, it does not work on the server 2019. And looks like there is actually a link to the script that performs all of these steps automatically. However, prior to chasing this, we need to escalate to this account first. To do that, I believe we can plant a reverse shell on the server, considering it looks like we have all access to most of the directories here. So let's head to that folder, do ls. I believe XAMPP serves hosts all of the files in this folder. So let's head there. Let's do another ls. And yep, looks like all of the files that are on the web page is here. Considering this is PHP, the next step would be to get a PHP reverse shell. I'm going to switch to the top window again and copy a PHP shell into my working directory. I will post a link to the PHP shell I've used in the video description, but I believe it's the Ivan one. So here I already have my IP configured on the port. In this case, we'll be using port 8010. So let's go ahead and download the script to the victim's web server. I will split the terminal again and listen to port 8010. I believe I've saved as a script. So let's go back here now and browse our reverse shell, which executes and gives us access as NT local service authority. So we've completed this step. Now let's go here to full powers and download the executable. Looks like this tab actually somehow loaded faster than the original one, so let's copy the link. wget. I'm just gonna rename it to a shorter name. And let's do here, who am I, Priv. As you can see, we only have 2 permissions, just like the author of the article has mentioned. So let's download this. So this reverse shell, when we called it, it actually gave us CMD. So let's upgrade to PowerShell and let's download. And looks like it has downloaded. So let's do who am I, Priv. Let's run the fp.exe. Let's do who am I, Priv again. So first of all, when we ran fp.exe, it created a new shell, it seems like, and we got downgraded from PowerShell to CMD again. However, now it looks like we have the impersonation privilege that I've mentioned. So let's do PowerShell again. Let's go back to C XAMPP. Since we know we can modify stuff there, and From here, I think it should be pretty straightforward. Let's Google potato exploit 2023, and let's see what is the latest. Local potato, that's via SMB. Let's actually narrow this down a little bit and say GitHub, so we can actually look for the exploits versus through a bunch of different articles. This should narrow it down quite a bit. So there's local potato, which is SMB based, and let's see, petit potato is local privilege escalation, so this should work better for us. And it looks like this has been released about a year ago, so perhaps that should work. So petit potam uses MS EFSR, encrypting file system remote, a protocol used to perform maintenance and management operations on encrypted data stored remotely and accessed over the network. There are a series of APIs similar to EFS, RPC, OpenFile, RA, in MS EFS-SR. Such APIs can specify a UNC path via file name parameter to open encrypted objects on the server for backup or restore. When the path is in format /IP share is specified, the LSAS service will access a pipe with anti-authority system privileges. If we can call EFS RPC OpenFile RA API to force the local computer to connect to a malicious name pipe we created, then we can impersonate the name pipe client process and eventually gain system privilege. So let's try this out and see if it works. So close the web server again, download, we'll rename it to pp.exe, and let's run our web server again. Let's download our file. And looks like Win32 internal error occurred while reading the console output buffer. I have seen this error previously, and I think it's due to a progress bar. In order to avoid this, you can do the following: progress preference equals silently continue. And that should fix the issue. Let's try this again. As we can see, we downloaded the exploit. Let's check for the syntax. I believe you just need to specify a number of the pipe. Let's do as the example shows us. And looks like it has been successful. Let's see. Who am I? Anti-authority. Just as a demo, let's go to users, Strader, desktop. And as you can see, root is right here. Overall, this was a pretty fun box. I wonder if the rest of these are worth chasing. Perhaps this was another way to get in, however, I did not confirm. Overall, I like this box. There's multiple steps that are involved in exploitation, and kudos to the author. See you guys next time.